What happens when a princess is sent as a peace offering to a kingdom that does not want her, to a people who despise her, and to a king who never asked for her hand? Would she survive the humiliation, or rewrite the destiny written against her? Stay with me, because this is only the beginning, and what unfolds will shock you. The gates of the Wolf King's court groaned open as the human delegation entered, their banners fluttering weakly against the cold wind. At the center of it all walked Alara, the youngest daughter of a human king who had run out of options in a war he could not win. She was dressed in white silk, a symbol of peace. But to the wolves watching from the balconies above, she looked like prey dressed for sacrifice. Whispers followed her steps. Fragile human. Too soft, too slow, she'll never last. The air stung with disdain, and every golden eye that fixed on her radiated one message: unwanted. At the far end of the hall sat Alpha King Kale, towering and immovable on his throne. His presence alone silenced the hall, yet his eyes, cold, unreadable, never softened as they landed on her. He did not rise to greet her. He did not even speak. His silence was sharper than the wolves' scorn. Alara lowered her head, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had been raised to believe in dignity, in alliances, in the honor of marriage. But here, in this court of fangs and claws, she was nothing more than a pawn in a game already stacked against her. The Council of Wolves broke the silence with mocking questions. Can she even run without breaking? Will she faint when she smells blood? Why chain our alpha to weakness? Her hands clenched inside her sleeves, but she remained silent. To speak would be to reveal fear, and fear was the scent they craved. At last, Kyle spoke. His voice was deep, gravel rolling over stone. This is the human princess? He did not look at her when he said it. So be it. The treaty stands. The hall erupted in growls of disapproval. Alara felt the floor shift beneath her, as if the palace itself rejected her presence. And in that chaos she caught a whisper not meant for her ears, wolves near the shadows, plotting in low growls. Tonight, an accident in the forest. No one will question it. Her breath caught. They weren't going to tolerate her existence for even a day. She was not only unwanted, she was marked. But Kale's gaze flickered briefly toward her then, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw something buried behind the steel of his eyes. Not mercy, not desire, but perhaps recognition. She swallowed hard, holding her head high, as though she had not overheard her impending death sentence. But inside she already knew. Her survival in this court would not depend on treaties or titles. It would depend on outwitting beasts who believed her weak, beginning with the alpha who refused to claim her. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and something darker: anticipation. Alara lay stiff in the cold chamber given to her, the words she overheard at court burning in her mind. Tonight. An accident in the forest. Every instinct screamed at her that she would not see another sunrise unless she acted. When the guards assigned to her door conveniently vanished, her heart confirmed the truth. They hadn't abandoned their posts. They had left her unprotected on purpose. A faint howl echoed from the woods, and the torches in the courtyard flickered. They were coming. She slipped on her cloak and pressed herself against the stone walls of the palace, searching for any escape. But it was no use. The wolves had planned this too well. The forest loomed like a waiting mouth, shadows stretching longer than they should. And then it began. From the tree line, figures emerged. Wolves, half-shifted, their glowing eyes fixed on her. One by one they encircled her like predators toying with prey. A voice growled from the darkness, mocking. "Run, little princess. Let us see if the human can survive the night." Her blood turned to ice. She ran. Branches whipped her face, her dress tore on thorns, and roots clawed at her ankles. Behind her the howls grew louder, closer, until hot breath grazed her neck. She stumbled into a clearing, and one wolf lunged, fangs flashing. But before they could strike, a massive shadow crashed into the clearing. The wolf yelped and was flung aside like a rag doll. Another followed, and met the same fate. Alara froze. It wasn't just any wolf that had arrived, it was him. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, his presence radiating power so raw it silenced the pack instantly. His eyes glowed gold, his frame larger, darker, as though the forest bent around him. His voice cut through the night like a blade. "Stand down." The hunters lowered their heads but did not move. Kale's gaze sharpened, and in a tone that brooked no defiance, he repeated, "I said, stand down." One by one, they slunk back into the shadows, leaving the forest eerily silent. Ilara, panting and trembling, stared at him. He had saved her. But why? She opened her mouth, words trembling on her lips. You stopped them. Why?" Kale's expression did not soften. If anything, it hardened. "Do not mistake this for kindness, Princess." His voice was colder than the night air. "Your death would complicate matters, that is all." His words struck harder than the claws that had chased her. He turned his back, already walking away, his silence heavier than steel chains. Ilara followed at a distance, anger and fear warring inside her. If he had not cared whether she lived, why had he come? Why reveal power that even his own wolves seemed to fear? Back inside the palace, she collapsed onto her bed, but sleep never came. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside carried the echo of fangs snapping behind her. And then, she saw it. Across the chamber, in the shadows near the balcony, Kyle stood silently, watching the forest as though listening to voices only he could hear. The moonlight carved sharp lines across his face and his eyes. His eyes were glowing. Not gold, not amber, but a searing light filled with something barely restrained. Rage, hunger, something inhuman. Her breath caught. This was no ordinary alpha. Kyle was hiding something monstrous, and she was bound to discover it. Ilara's breath froze in her chest as Kale's glowing eyes met hers. They pierced the darkness like twin flames, ancient and unrelenting, holding her in place as though she were prey under the hunter's gaze. She dared not move, her pulse roaring in her ears. Then, without a word, he turned away, vanishing into the night like a shadow swallowed by the moonlight. By morning, whispers flooded the palace. The human princess had already been targeted by wolves and survived, though none spoke aloud that it was Kale who had intervened. The court gathered in the great hall, their golden eyes flickering with suspicion and scorn. This fragile human, they decided, must prove her worth, or die trying. The High Council decreed their verdict. "Let her face the Blood Moon trial," an elder snarled, his voice carrying triumph. "If she survives, perhaps she belongs here. If not, the treaty breaks, and the fault is hers." The chamber erupted with approving growls. Ilara's heart hammered, but she stood tall, refusing to let them scent her fear. She glanced at Kyle, silently begging for a word, a gesture, any sign he would stop this madness. But he sat unmoved, his expression carved from stone. "Do not expect me to shield you, Princess," he said at last, his voice deep and final. "This trial is older than any throne. Survive it or perish." The labyrinth awaited her at the edge of the darkwood, its entrance a gaping maw carved into the earth. No map, no light, only twisting passages filled with ancient traps designed to spill blood. The trial had killed seasoned wolves before. For a human, it was a death sentence. The moon was blood red as she stepped inside. The air was damp, the walls breathing with cold stone. Each step echoed, too loud, too vulnerable. Shadows shifted, and the stench of old death clung to the air. Arrows shot from hidden slits, barely missing her. Pits opened beneath her feet, forcing her to leap across crumbling stones. She scraped her hands raw, her dress shredded as she crawled through tunnels meant to crush her bones. Hours dragged into an eternity. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, and her vision blurred. Yet every time she wanted to stop, she remembered the wolves' laughter, their whispers of her fragility. She would not give them the satisfaction. But the labyrinth seemed endless. She collapsed against a wall, sweat dripping, heart hammering like a trapped bird. Her body screamed surrender. The trial was claiming her. Her knees buckled, and she fell into the dirt. The world tilted, blackness pulling at the edges of her vision. This was it, her end. And then, Shadows moved. A massive wolf form emerged from the darkness, its eyes burning with unearthly fire. It placed itself between her and the unseen danger lurking ahead, a shield of fur and muscle and silent ferocity. She blinked through the haze, barely able to breathe. Was it Kale? Or something else entirely? Ilara. Her name was carried on a breath both fierce and gentle, brushing her skin as the great wolf's glowing eyes locked on her. The world tilted again, and darkness pulled her under. She did not know if she dreamed the voice or if the labyrinth itself had begun to whisper. When she woke, she was not lying in the dirt but in her chamber, her wounds cleaned and her body wrapped in furs far softer than the stone floor she had collapsed upon. Moonlight spilled through the window. For a moment she thought she had imagined everything, until her eyes caught the faint trail of muddy paw prints across the floor, leading to her bed. Her chest tightened. Someone had carried her out of that death trap. Someone had saved her when she should have perished. The next day the court gathered, expecting to see her body displayed as proof of her unfitness. Instead, she walked into the hall alive, tired, battered, but unbroken. Shock rippled through the wolves. Whispers rose like wildfire. She survived? Impossible. No human should have lived through the labyrinth. Ilara's gaze swept across the sea of faces, but it was Kale's unreadable expression she searched for. His eyes flickered for only a heartbeat, as though betraying something unspoken. "You carried me out," she said later, cornering him in a shadowed corridor. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "You saved me." Kale's jaw tightened, his silence louder than any denial. At last he spoke, his words clipped and cold. "You imagine things, Princess. If you survived, it was because you were meant to. Do not weave fantasies around me." But his denial was too sharp, too defensive. And she remembered. The wolf that had shielded her whispered her name. How could she have imagined that? The court, however, was far less subtle. They muttered about what had happened, about the Alpha's possible involvement. Why would Kale, the silent Alpha who trusted no one, risk himself for a human bride he had never wanted? Suspicion curled like smoke through the palace. Some whispered it was weakness. Others whispered it was fate. But not all whispers stayed quiet. That evening, as the great hall roared with arguments, the doors burst open. A tall figure strode in, clad in black leather and bearing the insignia of a rival pack. His presence alone sent a ripple of unease through the wolves. His name was known, his ambition feared. Darius. His voice cut through the chamber like steel. "This mockery has gone on long enough. A human walking free in the court of wolves is an insult to every Alpha who has spilled blood for our pride." His eyes, sharp and merciless, landed on Ilara. "End her, tonight, before her curse poisons us all." The hall erupted into growls, some in agreement, others in protest. Ilara felt the weight of 100 golden eyes pressing on her, as though the entire court waited for her execution. She stood frozen, her heart pounding. Her gaze darted to Kale, but his face was unreadable, his silence a blade hanging in the air. Darius's words hung in the hall like a death sentence. "If the Alpha King will not do what is necessary, then I, Darius, will spill the human's blood myself." The wolves erupted in chaos, snarls and growls clashing with the scrape of claws on stone. Some shouted their agreement. Wolves had no place bowing to fragile humans. Others shifted uneasily, wary of defying the throne. The great hall, built to contain the roar of kings, trembled with fury. Ilara stood rooted, her breath caught in her throat. She could feel Darius's killing intent press against her chest like an iron blade. He wasn't bluffing. If Kale remained silent, she would not live to see the dawn. And then, Kale rose. The entire chamber stilled. The silent Alpha, who so rarely moved or spoke, stepped down from his throne, his golden eyes burning with a restrained power that made the air itself crackle. His voice was deep, thunder rolling over mountains. "No wolf will lay a hand on her." The words struck like a hammer. Gasps echoed. Darius snarled, his sharp teeth bared. You would protect this? A fragile creature unworthy of your court? Do you mock our laws, Cale? Cale's gaze did not waver. You forget yourself, Darius. You are in my hall. My word is law, and my law is this. Alara lives. The authority in his tone silenced even the boldest rebels. Wolves shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty to Cale wrestling with their contempt for the human girl. Suspicion spread like wildfire. Why protect her? Why risk the wrath of rival packs for a human no one wanted? But Cale gave them nothing more. His silence was his shield, his coldness his weapon. He turned back toward his throne, dismissing the hall with a glance, leaving Alara caught between fear and bewilderment. That night, whispers chased her through the palace corridors. Some spoke of weakness, others of prophecy. A few even murmured that Cale had already begun to bond with her. She didn't know what to believe. Seeking escape from the stairs, Alara wandered deeper into the palace than she ever had before. The walls here were ancient, carved with symbols long forgotten. At the end of a narrow passage, she found a door half buried in ivy and dust. Curiosity gnawed at her. She pushed it open. Inside was a forgotten chamber, lit only by the pale glow of the moon through a cracked dome. Scrolls and tablets littered the floor, untouched by time. She lifted one, brushing away the dust. Her eyes widened as she read. It spoke of a prophecy, a mate of fragile blood, a bond that would either unite the wolves under one reign of peace or destroy them utterly in a storm of fire and ruin. The fate of the packs rested on the survival of one no wolf wanted. Her hands trembled as she traced the faded words. A fragile mate. A human. And then the air shifted. She wasn't alone. So, you found it. The voice was sharp as a blade, cutting through the dusty air of the hidden chamber. Alara whirled around, clutching the brittle scroll to her chest. Kyle stood in the doorway, half-shadowed, his golden eyes glinting with a dangerous light. Her heart pounded. She had expected a guard, or perhaps Darius, but not him. Not the Alpha King himself. I didn't mean to intrude, she stammered. I only... Read what was never meant for your eyes, Cale finished, his tone low, controlled, but thrumming with something darker beneath. He stepped inside, and the air thickened with his presence. Alara forced her chin up. It speaks of a fragile mate, a human. Me. Tell me it isn't true. For the first time, Cale's composure cracked, a flicker of emotion flashing across his face. Rage or fear, she couldn't tell. You should not meddle with prophecy. Then deny it, she demanded, her voice trembling but fierce. Deny that you saved me in the labyrinth. Deny that your court whispers about why their alpha shields a human. Cale's jaw clenched, his silence louder than any admission. The tension between them snapped like a bowstring. Alara's chest rose and fell rapidly, anger and fear tangling together. You're afraid of me, she whispered. Or of what I might mean to you. That did it. Cale moved in a blur, his hand braced against the wall beside her, trapping her in the shadow of his presence. His eyes glowed brighter, golden fire bleeding into something wilder, rawer. His control fractured, and for the first time, Alara saw not the silent alpha, but the wolf straining beneath his skin. Ilara, he growled, her name rough on his tongue. His breath was hot, his restraint slipping like chains snapping one by one. Before she could step back, his head dipped and his teeth grazed the soft skin of her neck. Pain flared, then heat. A burning, searing brand that sank deep into her very soul. She gasped, her knees buckling, clutching his arm to stay upright. A rush of sensation tore through her, fear, longing, power, all tangled together in a surge that left her trembling. Cale froze, his eyes widening as he realized what he had done. The court felt it instantly. Somewhere beyond the walls, a howl rose, mournful and furious, carrying the weight of an omen. Wolves burst into the hall outside, shouting in panic. He marked her! The Alpha bound himself to a human. The prophecy! It's happening! Cale staggered back, horror flashing across his face. His control had shattered, and in his weakness he had done the one thing no wolf could undo. A bond had formed, half complete, raw, and irreversible. Alara's hand pressed to her neck, feeling the searing mark that pulsed with unnatural heat. She collapsed to the ground as the world tilted, darkness claiming her again. When her eyes fluttered open hours later, the chamber was silent. But something was wrong. The light through the window was sharper, every flicker of shadow alive with detail. She could hear footsteps echoing in distant corridors, the flutter of wings outside, the racing heartbeat of someone standing guard far down the hall. She drew in a breath, and scents exploded across her tongue. Wood smoke, steel, wolf. Her hands shook as realization struck her. Her reflection wavered in the glass, faint golden light pulsing in her pupils like the echo of some hidden beast. Alara stumbled back, her hands trembling. She was no longer just human, yet she was not wolf either. Whatever Kale had done when he marked her, it had changed her in ways she could not yet understand. By dawn, the palace buzzed with agitation. News of the half-bond had spread, twisting through the halls like wildfire. Whispers followed her every step, some laced with fear, others with hatred. The cursed human. She carries the Alpha's mark. What will she become? That evening, the great hall glittered with torches for the royal feast. Long tables groaned beneath platters of meat, goblets of wine, and fruits harvested under the blood moon. It was meant to show strength and unity, but beneath the laughter and music lurked venomous stares. Alara took her seat beside Kale, her senses sharper than ever. She could hear heartbeats hammering, smell deceit layered beneath spiced wine, feel the tension pressing like a storm about to break. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted the goblet set before her. The liquid shimmered crimson, richer than blood. She hesitated. Something about the scent was wrong, sweet, cloying, laced with bitterness that didn't belong. She lowered the cup. Too late. The first sip seared her throat like fire. Her vision blurred, the hall spinning in sickening circles. Her body convulsed, the goblet clattering to the floor as she collapsed against the table. The music screeched to a halt. Wolves rose to their feet, snarling, but none moved to help her. Kyle did. In an instant he was at her side, his hand cradling her as his eyes blazed with fury. "Poison," he growled, his voice reverberating through the hall like thunder. "Who dares?" The floor itself seemed to shake with his rage. Wolves flinched as his power surged outward, crushing the air from their lungs. His fangs bared, his claws lengthened, and his alpha command tore through the chamber. "Find the traitor, or I will tear this court apart." The feast dissolved into chaos. Guards rushed to seize servants, nobles shouted accusations, and the scent of fear thickened like smoke. Alara gasped, her vision fading, her senses flaring in strange new ways. She could smell the poison coursing through her blood, bitter and sharp, twisting inside her veins. She could smell it on others, too, lingering on hands, on fabrics, on breath. Her gaze locked onto one figure moving through the crowd. Familiar, trusted. The scent clung to them like guilt made flesh. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her. Alara's lips trembled as she whispered the name. Her handmaiden, the one who addressed her. Whispered comfort when the court stares cut too deep. The only familiar warmth in a world of wolves. The girl froze as eyes turned upon her, the scent of guilt now unmistakable. Guards dragged her forward, kicking and thrashing. The once gentle servant spat like a cornered beast, her face contorted by fear and defiance. Alara's chest burned as the poison gnawed at her insides, but her heart broke more painfully than her body. "Tell me why." Kyle's voice was low, deadly. Each word fell like a stone into silence. The girl's eyes darted between Alara's fading form and the Alpha's blazing gaze. Then, with a sob, she spoke. I was offered gold, promises of freedom. A council member?" Her voice cracked as Kale's claws glinted near her throat. He said the court would never accept a human, that if I loved my family, I had to end her before she cursed us all. Gasps rippled through the hall. Eyes flickered between one another. Fear, suspicion, hunger for blood. A council member had ordered the death of the marked human, and the handmaiden was the tool. Alara tried to sit up, but her limbs betrayed her, trembling under the poison's weight. Her heart screamed louder than her body. Why? Why betray me? Kyle stood towering, his fury radiating. You would dare touch what I have claimed? His voice cracked like thunder. You would stain my court with treachery? The girl shook, tears streaking down her cheeks. She's cursed, she wailed, pointing at Alara. The mark, the prophecy, she will destroy us all. You're blind, Alpha. She is death walking among wolves. The court erupted into shouts. The curse, the prophecy. Kill her before it's too late. Kale raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade. His claws hovered near the handmaiden's throat. For treachery against your Alpha, the sentence is death. His eyes burned with silver fire. But before the killing blow could fall, the handmaiden arched back, a scream ripping from her throat. Her body convulsed, her eyes bulged wide with terror. A violent snap echoed through the hall as if her very soul was torn from within. Blood ran from her lips as she collapsed lifeless at Kale's feet. Not slain by his hand, not slain by steel. Something unseen had killed her. Gasps filled the chamber, wolves stumbling back as if the corpse might rise again. Alara, half-conscious, felt the air shift. Thick, cold, humming with power that did not belong to wolves. A shadow seemed to cling to the handmaiden's body, then vanish like smoke. Kale's snarl ripped through the hall. Magic. The word was venom. Wolves shivered. Magic was not their domain. It belonged to something far older, far darker. Alara's heart hammered, fear clawing at her ribs. Whoever wanted her dead was not only among wolves. Something else had reached into the heart of the court. The chamber was drowned in silence, broken only by the faint hiss of the glowing runes still burning into the handmaiden's corpse. Wolves shifted uneasily, their ears pressed flat against their skulls. The sight of magic carved into flesh was a violation, a taunt, and every wolf present could smell the sour stench of fear rising thick in the air. Alara clutched her chest, her breath ragged. The poison still pulsed through her veins, but what chilled her more was recognition. Those symbols twisting across the girl's body were the same as in the prophecy she had read by candlelight, the prophecy of the fragile mate. She had no time to speak it aloud. The torches lining the hall sputtered, flames bowing as though to some unseen presence. A voice, brittle and sharp as bone, whispered through the shadows. Fools! You cannot hide destiny with daggers and poison. Gasps erupted as a figure materialized from the darkness between the pillars. A woman draped in tattered gray, her hair white as frost, her eyes twin voids that swallowed the firelight. The stench of old earth and ash followed her like a storm. Wolves instinctively bared their teeth, their growls trembling between rage and terror. A witch! Someone spat. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between Alara and the figure, his claws unsheathed, his wolf straining beneath his skin. You dare enter my court? His voice was lethal. The witch tilted her head unbothered. Not dared, summoned. By prophecy. By her. Her eyes shifted past Kale and locked on Alara. Cold recognition burned there, as though the witch had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Alara's throat dried. She wanted to shrink beneath that gaze, yet something deep within her stirred, answering the pull. What do you want with her? Kyle snarled. The witch ignored him, stepping closer. Every wolf bristled, but none moved, as though bound by something greater than fear of Kale. You mistake her for weak flesh. You see only the human. But her bloodline... Her voice dropped to a hiss. Her bloodline is older than your throne, Alpha. Older than your wolves. The room stilled. Even Kale faltered. Alara's voice cracked. What are you saying? The witch's lips curled in a cruel smile. They did not reject you because you are fragile. They rejected you because you are dangerous. Your veins carry a curse, and a crown. The word struck like a blade. Alara staggered, her head spinning. All her life she had believed herself powerless, prey among predators. Now this witch was saying the wolves had cast her out not for what she lacked, but for what she carried. Cale's claws pressed into the stone floor, his jaw tight. "You speak in riddles, witch. Say what you mean, or I'll tear the tongue from your mouth." The witch's laughter rasped like dry leaves. "Your rage is wasted. You cannot kill what the fates have woven." She leaned forward, her shadow spilling across the floor toward Alara. Her eyes glowed with something unearthly. Then she whispered low enough that only Alara could hear, though the entire hall seemed to shiver with the weight of it. "If Cale claims you fully, he will die." The words sliced through Alara's heart. Cale stiffened, sensing the witch's venom but not the words themselves. Alara's breath caught in her throat, torn between disbelief and terror. Claiming her, completing the bond, was death? The witch's smile widened, her face withering and fading back into shadow. "Choose carefully, little princess, for love and ruin are the same thread in your hands." The torches flared, then dimmed, and she was gone. The court erupted into chaos, wolves shouting, panic spilling like wildfire. But Alara could hear none of it. Her eyes locked on Cale's, who was demanding to know what the witch had said. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The hall still shook with the aftershocks of the witch's departure. Wolves snarled, others muttered in fear, but Cale heard none of it. His world narrowed to Alara, her lips pale, her eyes shimmering with fear as the words slipped from her mouth. "If you bond me, you'll die." For a heartbeat, Kyle did not move. The muscles in his jaw tightened until it seemed they would snap. A storm raged behind his eyes, instinct howling to protect her, to claim her, to silence every threat, while reason clawed back with cold, bitter logic. The witch's words were poison, yet they stuck in his veins like truth. "Alara," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "What did she whisper to you?" She opened her mouth, but her courage faltered. How could she tell him again? That his love, his bond, was a death sentence? Her silence was its own answer. Cale's breath shuddered. A growl vibrated from his chest. Not at her, but at fate itself. Still, he forced himself to turn away. "Stay away from me," he commanded, the words sharp as a blade. The court fell silent in shock. For the first time, Kyle, the alpha who had defied counsel and rival alike to shield her, was pushing her away. Something inside Alara shattered. His back was rigid, his broad shoulders closing her out like an unscalable wall. And in that moment, she understood. Whatever bond the half-mark had started, he would rather tear it apart than risk becoming the witch's prophecy. That night, as the moon carved silver lines across the palace, Ilara stood in her chambers with trembling hands packing what little she owned. Her decision was agony, but staying meant dragging Cale further into danger. If leaving was the only way to protect him, then she would vanish, even if her heart bled for it. But fate was never merciful. She slipped from the palace under the cover of night, cloak pulled tight against the cold wind. The forest loomed, shadows stretching like claws. Every step away from Cale felt like tearing skin from bone, yet she pressed on. That was when the growls came, low, predatory, surrounding her. She froze as figures emerged from the darkness, wolves with silver eyes and scarred muzzles, their leader stepping forward with a cruel grin. Darius. "Well, well," he drawled. The little human rabbit thought she could slip away. "Did you really think Cale's protection would last forever? Tonight, fragile mate, you die." They lunged. Ilara screamed, stumbling back as claws slashed through the air. Teeth snapped inches from her throat. She ran, branches whipping her skin, but the pack was faster, circling, driving her toward the clearing where the moonlight spilled like a spotlight for her execution. A claw raked her arm, pain seared hot and sharp. She fell, breath ragged, vision blurring. Wolves closed in, fangs bared for the killing bite. Then the air split. A roar thundered across the forest, shaking the trees, freezing Darius's pack mid-step. The ground itself trembled as Cale strode into the clearing, his eyes blazing with molten fire. But it was more than fury. His wolf aura towered, oppressive, suffocating, a force so raw, even seasoned alphas stumbled back in dread. And then Alara saw it. Shadows rippling beneath his skin, his form warping as though something far more monstrous than a wolf clawed to be free. The pack whimpered. Darius hissed, taking a cautious step back. Cale bared his teeth, voice rumbling with a darkness that wasn't entirely his own. No one touches what is mine. The forest quaked as Cale's roar ripped through the night. Shadows bled from his skin, twisting with fire and moonlight until his wolf form no longer looked like any wolf at all. His frame doubled in size, fur streaked with unnatural darkness, his fangs elongated into obsidian blades. Darius and his pack stumbled back in horror. "No!" one wolf gasped, tail tucked, eyes wide. "It can't be. The cursed Alpha bloodline." The name slashed through the clearing like a curse. Alara, still clutching her bleeding arm, forced herself to her knees. Her heart pounded, every instinct screaming to flee from the monster before her. Yet even in that terrifying shape, she knew him. She knew the man inside. Cale's eyes burned like molten coals, unrecognizable, consumed by a rage that shook the earth itself. With a single swipe of his monstrous claw, a tree splintered into shards. Darius's wolves yelped, scrambling into the shadows. Even their leader staggered, bravado faltering as he whispered, "He'll slaughter us all." And Cale might. The cursed bloodline was no myth. It was power born from an ancient pact, a gift twisted into destruction. Every alpha who carried it had fallen, consumed by the darkness that magnified their rage until they turned on their own. Cale's growls deepened, feral and broken. His claws tore into the soil as if he could not contain himself. Wolves scattered, but Alara's gaze fixed on him. Not the monster he seemed, but the man she had seen sacrifice pride, protection, and even his heart for her. "Cale." Her voice trembled, swallowed by the wind, yet something in his ears flicked toward her. She forced herself forward, step by agonizing step, until she stood before the beast. The air was suffocating, thick with his power, crushing her lungs, but still she reached out. Her hand shook violently as she lifted it. Wolves howled from the tree line, shouting for her to stop. But she pressed on. Her palm brushed the fur along his chest, hot and bristling with energy. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. His power surged higher, jaws snapping toward her face with a snarl that could end her life in an instant. And then, silence. The shadows shuddered, recoiling as though struck. Cale's monstrous frame froze, his blazing eyes flickering between gold and black. His breath came ragged, but the rage that had been consuming him faltered beneath her trembling touch. "No wolf," one of the onlookers whispered in awe, "has ever calmed a cursed alpha." Alara's hand lingered, her own fear replaced by a strange, bone-deep certainty. Somehow, she was his tether. Cale collapsed to his knees, his monstrous form flickering back toward the man she knew, though his eyes still burned faintly with forbidden fire. He looked up at her, half in horror, half in disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom what had just happened. The silver spear gleamed in the torchlight, leveled at Cale's chest. The enforcer's voice was cold as iron. "The cursed Alpha bloodline is forbidden. By decree of the Council, Cale of Blackfang must be executed before the curse devours us all." The forest stilled. Wolves from Darius's pack, emboldened by the Council's arrival, began to chant in low growls, "Death to the cursed, death to the human." Their voices bled together into something primal and ugly. Alara's chest tightened. She stepped forward, planting herself between Cale and the silver-tipped spear. "No," she said, her voice cracking but steadying as it carried across the clearing. "You call him cursed, but I saw him fight to control it. I saw him protect me when he could have destroyed everything. Does that sound like a monster to you?" A ripple of uneasy silence passed through the gathered wolves, but Darius seized it like a weapon. He emerged from the shadows, cloak dragging across the dirt, his smirk a dagger aimed at Cale's back. "Listen to her," Darius said mockingly. "The fragile mate speaks with the voice of prophecy, the one who would unite us or destroy us. But can you not see? She has already begun to destroy us. Cale is no longer Alpha. He is a plague. And the Council's law is clear. He must fall." Wolves shifted uneasily, eyes flicking between their current alpha and the usurper who dripped poison into their ears. For years Kale had held them with unflinching authority, but fear was a powerful rival, and Darius fed it skillfully. The enforcers tightened their circle, but Kale rose slowly to his feet, his shadow towering, his voice low and dangerous. Any wolf who raises a hand against me will learn what it means to challenge the alpha. The crowd erupted. Some wolves howled their loyalty, while others growled their defiance, their claws scraping against stone and soil as battle lines began to form. The rebellion had begun, not with swords, but with fear, whispered into every wolf's ear. That night, the palace halls echoed with unease. Nobles who once bowed in loyalty whispered treachery behind closed doors. Packs shifted allegiances in the dark, and always Darius's words lingered. The human curse will end us all. Elara tried to steel herself, but her hands trembled. She could feel the eyes that followed her every step, hear the hiss of words like witch, curse, doom. Even Kale's closest allies looked at her with questions they dared not voice. And Kale, though he walked with the bearing of an alpha, had shadows clinging to him now. The prophecy weighed on his shoulders. The curse burned in his blood. And for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes when he looked at her. Still, he stood before his throne, silent and unyielding as the palace shook with unrest. "Brother," the word tasted of disbelief, of wounds deeper than blades. From the shadows stepped a man with Kale's same storm-gray eyes, though colder, sharpened by resentment. His name was Lucian, Kale's half-brother, long thought exiled beyond the northern borders. Now he stood with a wolf's grin and the council's mark etched into his armor. "I warned you," Lucian said softly, circling Kale like a predator circling wounded prey. "The council will not tolerate a cursed alpha. Your throne was never meant for you, it was meant for me." The blade in his hand glinted with silver runes, a weapon forged for one purpose, to subdue the cursed blood. With calculated cruelty Lucian struck. Chains of silver, glowing faintly with binding magic, unfurled from the weapon and lashed around Kale's arms, burning his skin. He roared, the sound shaking the hall, but the bonds held firm. The throne room erupted as guards swarmed, not Kale's but Lucian's. Wolves who had sworn loyalty to Kale just days before now bent knee to his brother. Betrayal oozed through the palace like spilled poison. "Elara!" Kale's voice cracked through the chaos as he was forced to his knees, blood dripping from his wrists. "Run." But she didn't. Her legs felt carved from stone as she watched the unthinkable, Kale, the indomitable alpha, dragged down by treachery. Her heart pounded like a drumbeat of war. She wanted to run to him to claw at the chains, but wolves closed in around her, snarling. Lucian's smile was ice. "The council fears you, fragile mate. They say you carry a curse that binds to his. I say you're his weakness, and so—" He motioned to the guards. "Bring her. She will watch her king fall." Dragged before the throne, Elara felt the weight of countless eyes. Wolves hungry for blood, nobles whispering of doom, rebels eager for her death. Kyle, chained and bleeding, lifted his gaze to her. Even bound, his eyes burned with alpha fire. But for the first time, she saw something else flicker in him. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. She swallowed hard. This was not her world. These politics, these laws written in fang and claw, were never meant for human hands. And yet, standing in the circle of wolves, hearing the prophecy echo in her skull, "Fragile mate, unite or destroy," Elara knew she could not stand silent. Her voice rang out, trembling but unyielding. "If you would condemn me, then I demand the right of challenge." The hall fell silent. Gasps swept the chamber like wildfire. Wolves turned to one another, disbelief etched in every snarl and whisper. Lucian's eyes narrowed. "You dare invoke that?" "I do," Elara said, standing taller than she felt. "The Court of Fangs recognizes no title, no bloodline, only the right of survival. If you want me dead, then you face me in the trial." Kale's chains rattled as he surged forward, his voice thunderous. "Elara, no!" But it was done. The ancient words had been spoken, and the wolves could not deny them. The gong's toll still echoed heavy as thunder when the circle of wolves closed around Alara. Their eyes gleamed like lanterns in the dark, hungry for blood, hungry for spectacle. The Court of Fangs was no ordinary trial. It was a crucible where cunning, strength, and ruthlessness decided who lived and who perished. Never in its history had a human spoken the sacred words. "She will die before the first bell," a noble scoffed, his voice carrying smug certainty. Others growled in agreement, the scent of bloodlust rising thick in the air. Alara's knees trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her heart pounded like war drums, echoing Kale's cry in her mind. "Alara, no!" But there was no turning back. The moment she invoked the ancient rite, she had bound herself to it with more than words. Wolves revered their laws as sacred, and to break them meant certain death. The trial began. In the center of the chamber, 3 challenges were laid before her: the trial of truth, the trial of loyalty, and the trial of cunning. Alara knew she couldn't best them in tooth and claw, but perhaps in wit. The trial of truth came first. She was forced to stand before the assembly while wolves hurled accusations, cursed, weak, a danger to the pack. Her handmaiden's betrayal was thrown at her, the prophecy whispered like a blade against her throat. But Alara did not falter. "I am not your curse," she said, voice steady. "I am the mirror showing you the rot within your own court. You fear me not because I am weak, but because I make you face what you've become." Silence followed, tense and unwilling, but no wolf could refute her words. The trial of loyalty followed. They demanded proof. Would she betray Kale to save herself? Lucian's voice cut sharp, offering her freedom if she denounced the Alpha. Every instinct screamed for survival, but her chest burned with the memory of Kale's chains. His eyes locked on hers even as silver tore him apart. She lifted her chin and said, "My life is nothing without my loyalty. I stand with Kale." Gasps rippled across the court. Wolves respected loyalty above all, and she had just declared hers in front of every rival. Then came the trial of cunning, a game of strategy, a battle of wits where wolves tried to corner her with riddles and traps of politics. One misstep could condemn her, but Alara remembered every whispered secret, every sideways glance, every tremor of fear she'd seen since her arrival. Piece by piece, she laid their hypocrisy bare, turning their own words into snares. By the end, even her accusers shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had been outplayed by a human. The gong tolled again, final and undeniable. Against impossible odds, Alara had survived. She stood in the center of the circle, not victorious in strength but unbroken in mind. Whispers swirled like storm winds, some in awe, some in rage. But before the court could dissolve, a booming voice shattered the hall. "Darius!" He stormed in, clad in black armor, his wolves bristling behind him. His eyes blazed like wildfire as he pointed a clawed hand at Alara. "This mockery ends tonight. The fragile mate is no savior. She is the ruin of us all. And if Kale and his cursed bloodline will not be purged by trial, then let it be by war." The court erupted. Wolves howled, blades were drawn, and the scent of battle filled the air. The horns wailed again, long and terrible, echoing through stone and marrow. Wolves in the court froze, their arguments swallowed by the thunder of war drums outside. Then, with a crash like lightning splitting the sky, the palace gates shuddered under the first strike of the rebel battering ram. Smoke curled into the rafters, carrying the scent of fire and blood. Shadows danced across the golden walls as panic erupted. Darius's army had surrounded the palace. Wolves bayed and roared, claws clashing against steel. "Seize the traitors," Lucian barked, his command splitting the court into factions, half scrambling to defend the throne, half rushing to join the rebellion. Amid the chaos, Alara's heart pounded. She had only one thought: Kale. She fled the court, weaving through corridors already filling with smoke and bodies. Wolves snarled and tore at one another, their civil war spilling through the palace halls. Statues toppled, banners burned, and every step was a race against destruction. Finally, she reached the dungeon. The iron doors groaned as she pushed inside. Cale hung in silver chains, his skin blistered, his body trembling under their poison. His eyes lifted to hers, glowing faintly but dimmer than she had ever seen. "Ilara." His voice was raw, cracked. "You shouldn't be here." She ran to him, hands frantically working at the locks. "I'm not leaving you here to die while Darius tears the palace apart." The chains resisted her strength, searing her skin with every touch. Desperate, she seized a broken shard of metal from the ground, forcing it into the lock until it snapped open. One by one the chains fell, Cale collapsing into her arms. His weight was heavy, his breath shallow. The ground trembled. The rebels had breached the first courtyard. Shouts echoed closer, the scent of smoke choking the air. Cale struggled to rise, but his legs faltered, his wolf too weakened by silver and betrayal. For the first time, the alpha looked breakable. "They'll come for you," he rasped, pushing at her with trembling hands. "Go, Ilara. Save yourself." She shook her head fiercely, cradling his face. "Not without you." Another crash shook the dungeon walls. Flames licked down the stairwell. The rebels were inside. Ilara's mind raced. She had only one choice left, one path that might save him, or destroy them both. The mate bond ritual. Her pulse quickened, her blood singing with the half-bond still etched into her skin. She knew the risk. The witch's warning whispered through her mind. If Cale claims you fully, he will die. But without strength, without his wolf, Cale would not survive the night. Tears burned her eyes as she pressed her forehead against his. "Forgive me," she whispered. Then she opened the bond. Energy surged through her veins, hot and wild, as her soul reached for his. Light flared at their touch, burning brighter than the fire devouring the palace. Cale gasped, his body convulsing, his claws gouging the stone floor as the bond tried to take hold. "Cale!" Ilara's cry tore through the dungeon, raw with terror. His body was heavy in her arms, his chest frighteningly still. Around them, flames roared closer, smoke stinging her lungs. But she could only cling to him, shaking. Then, his heart thudded. Once. Twice. A fierce rhythm that grew stronger with every beat. A golden light burst from the half-moon scar on his neck where her bond mark glowed. The light traveled through her veins, searing her skin in delicate patterns until it flared out between them like a living flame. Their breaths synced, their pulses merged, and for a single terrifying moment, she felt his soul slam against hers. The bond had completed. Cale inhaled sharply, his claws gouging the stone floor as his wolf surged back. His golden eyes opened, brighter than before, almost blinding in their intensity. His wounds knit closed before her gaze, chains of weakness breaking like ash. "Ilara." His voice was different now, deeper, resonating like two voices speaking in harmony. "What have you done?" She should have felt relief, joy. Instead, a sharp pain rippled through her chest. She staggered, clutching at herself, gasping as her heartbeat no longer felt entirely her own. She could feel him inside her, not just his emotions, but his instincts, his hunger, his fury. Wolves howled above as the palace groaned under the siege. Cale rose to his feet, renewed power radiating from him in waves that shook the dungeon walls. Rebels charging down the stairwell froze, terror-stricken as Cale unleashed a guttural roar. His voice was no longer just that of a man, or even a wolf. It was something older, darker. The rebels fled without a fight, but Ilara barely noticed. Her skin burned as the golden patterns etched themselves deeper. She stumbled toward the reflective shards of a shattered chain. Her breath caught in her throat. Her reflection stared back with alien intensity. Her once human eyes glowed bright silver, rimmed with wolfish gold. Her pupils narrowed into a predator's slits. She reached trembling fingers toward her face, but her reflection did not mirror her touch. It moved a fraction late, like something alive on its own. "Ilara." Cale's voice softened now, his hand reaching for hers. "Look at me." She turned slowly, but the glow in her eyes did not fade. She could feel her humanity slipping, her thoughts twisting with Kale's instincts. Blood, hunt, power. And beneath it all, a hunger she didn't recognize as her own. Alara stumbled back from the shard of metal, her breath ragged. Her reflection still gleamed with silver and gold eyes, but the smile had faded, replaced by a steady, knowing stare that chilled her blood. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, where the mate bond thrummed like a second heartbeat, binding her to Kale more tightly than chains ever could. Alara. Kale's hand cupped her face, steady and warm, grounding her in the storm of alien instincts. Yet when her gaze met his, she saw not just relief in his eyes, but fear. Fear of what she was becoming. The rebels' howls echoed through the burning palace, but Kale and Alara moved like shadows between collapsing corridors, seeking refuge. When they finally reached the throne room, the survivors of Kale's loyal guard gathered, bloodied but defiant. All eyes turned to Alara. They flinched at her glow, whispers rising like smoke. Half-wolf, witch spawn, cursed mate. A memory she didn't own flickered through her mind. An ancient battlefield where humans with silver eyes stood shoulder to shoulder with wolves, their bodies half-changed, their souls blazing. They had been queens and kings once, leaders, until they were slaughtered, hunted into extinction. Her chest tightened. She was the last. Kyle sensed it too. Alara, he murmured, voice hushed with awe. You are not just human. You are of them, the forgotten ones. The words hung heavy. She wanted to deny it, but her blood thrummed with the truth. The bond had awakened what centuries of silence had buried. She was neither human nor wolf. She was something in between, something the court had long feared. But before she could speak, a chill swept across the ruined hall. Torches guttered, shadows lengthened. The scent of herbs and grave soil filled the air. The witch emerged from the smoke, her eyes pale as bone, her smile cruel. So the blood remembers, she whispered, her voice echoing with centuries. The half-wolf queen rises at last. The guards recoiled, some growling, others bowing their heads in terror. The witch's gaze fixed on Alara with unblinking hunger. You hold two souls now, the witch said. One of man, one of wolf. But such power is not without cost. She lifted a bony finger, pointing at Alara's heart, then at Kyle, standing protectively at her side. The bond you forged is poison. If you live, he dies. If he lives, your soul will shatter. Alara's breath caught. What are you saying? The witch's smile widened. Choose, child. The Alpha's life, or your own survival. The hall was silent save for the ragged breaths of those who remained loyal. Darkness pressed in, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint glow in Alara's eyes. Her hand clutched Kale's chest, panicked, as his heartbeat stuttered beneath her palm. Kale, stay with me, she whispered. The witch's laughter slithered through the chamber, echoing like a curse etched into the stones. Now you know. The bond you sealed is not salvation. It is a bargain. One soul must be consumed for the other to endure. Alara's pulse raced, her throat tight. She wanted to demand answers, but Kale gripped her hand, his touch fierce though his strength waned. Don't listen to her, he growled, though his voice cracked with pain. She deals in fear, nothing more. Yet in his eyes Alara glimpsed something he tried desperately to hide. Recognition. He knew this was true. The witch's figure dissolved into smoke, her final words hanging like daggers. The prophecy of blood has begun. The queen who rises will do so upon the ashes of her mate. When the shadows lifted, Kale pulled Alara close, shielding her from the watchful stares of his wolves. You are safe, he said firmly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I will not let her touch you again. But deep inside, Kale knew the witch had not lied. He had heard whispers of the cursed Alpha bloodline all his life, the stories of bonds that ended in death. The truth struck him like a blade. Either Alara's soul would be devoured by the bond, or his own. And if she died, his pack would lose not only their Alpha's mate, but their rising queen. That night, While Alara rested in the remnants of the palace chamber, Kale stood alone by the war map. His generals gathered, grim-faced, as reports of Darius's march poured in. The rebellion was days away from breaching their lands. Kale's hand hovered over the map, his jaw clenched. "The prophecy is clear," he said at last. His voice was steady, but his heart raged. "If I fall, she will live. She will lead. That is enough." "Alpha," one general murmured, eyes wide with disbelief. "It is decided," Kyle growled, his tone brooking no argument. "When the final battle comes, I will give my life to sever the curse, my blood for her survival. The pack will endure through her." But Kyle did not know. Alara had awoken, drawn by the tremor of his voice. She stood in the shadows beyond the chamber's edge, her hands trembling as his words carved through her. Her heart shattered, her breath caught in her throat. He hadn't told her. He had chosen to die for her. Alara pressed herself against the stone wall, breath shallow, the weight of Kale's words shattering her. "He means to die for me." Her fingers curled into fists, trembling with fury. The glowing light in her eyes burned brighter than ever, a fire that was no longer just human grief. It was something older, deeper. When dawn broke, the air was thick with the iron tang of war. Darius's banners rose like black flames on the horizon, his army stretching across the hills, wolves howling their call to conquest. The palace walls shook with the rhythm of drums. Kyle stood at the battlements, cloak whipping in the wind, every inch the Alpha King. But Alara climbed the steps beside him, her shoulders squared, her presence undeniable. Gasps rippled through the wolves. A human had no place at the front lines, yet her aura silenced them. "I will not stay hidden," she declared, her voice carrying over the soldiers. "This fight is mine as much as yours. You call me cursed, but I am proof that fate can be rewritten. Stand with me or watch me stand alone." A stunned hush followed. Then slowly, one wolf bowed its head. Another, then another. In moments, dozens of warriors lowered themselves in respect, not to their alpha, but to their queen. Kyle's jaw tightened, pride warring with fear in his chest. "Alara," he whispered, his hand brushing hers, a fleeting moment before the storm consumed them. The clash erupted with brutal ferocity. Steel met claw, fang tore through flesh, the air thick with smoke and fire as Darius's forces crashed against the palace defenses. Alara fought at the front, blade in hand, her movements unnaturally swift, guided by the wolf essence awakening inside her. She cut down enemies with precision, her glowing eyes striking terror even into seasoned warriors. "Protect the queen," wolves roared around her, their formation rallying to her command. Across the battlefield, Kale and Darius found each other. The rebel Alpha grinned, his fangs bared, his massive form towering in blood-soaked armor. "This ends tonight, brother," Darius spat, his voice a growl thick with rage. "You've cursed our kind for too long. Your throne dies with you." Kale's eyes burned crimson, his cursed blood surging. "Then come take it." The two collided with earth-shaking force, claws and blades sparking as the world seemed to bend beneath their rage. Wolves stopped to watch, the battle pausing as Alpha met Alpha in a duel that would decide the future of their kind. Every strike rattled through the ground, Kale's cursed power flaring dangerously, threatening to consume him. Darius, brutal and relentless, pressed his advantage with cruel precision. Blow after blow landed, Kale staggering, blood soaking his chest. Then, Darius's claw found its mark, plunging deep. Kale gasped, the world dimming, crimson spilling across the ground. His knees buckled as Darius's triumphant roar split the battlefield. "Kale!" Alara's scream tore through the chaos as she shoved past soldiers, her blade dripping crimson, her lungs burning. Time seemed to shatter around her, the clang of steel, the clash of wolves, the roar of war, all fading until there was only Kale crumpled in the dirt, blood pooling at his feet. Darius straightened, his cruel grin lit by firelight. "The cursed Alpha bleeds at last," he sneered, raising his claw for the final strike. "And when he falls, the wolves will rise cleansed." But he never brought his hand down. A shockwave rippled outward as Alara fell to her knees beside Kale, her hands glowing with blinding light where they touched his chest. Her eyes, no longer just human, no longer fully wolf, flared with a molten gold that silenced the battlefield. The power of her bloodline, long buried, erupted like a storm unleashed. Wolves staggered back, shielding their eyes. Even Darius faltered. "You will not take him," Alara hissed, her voice layered with something ancient, something eternal. The air trembled as both her human spirit and the wolf essence fused into a force no one alive had ever seen. She rose slowly, carrying Kale's weightless body in her arms for a moment before laying him gently aside. Then she turned, stepping toward Darius. Each footfall cracked the stone beneath her, as if the earth itself bent to her will. Darius roared, shifting into his monstrous wolf form, towering over her, fangs dripping with blood. "You are nothing but a curse." Alara's aura flared, her form shimmering with both wolf and human essence, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "No," she whispered. "I am the balance." With a cry that split the heavens, she unleashed her power. The battlefield erupted in a maelstrom of fire and wind, shadows and light weaving into a storm. Wolves were thrown back like leaves in a gale. Darius lunged, claws flashing, but Alara caught him mid-strike with her bare hands. For a heartbeat, the rebel alpha stared in disbelief. Then her power tore through him, dissolving his form into dust that scattered on the wind. Silence fell. The storm ebbed, and all eyes turned to her. Alara staggered, her chest heaving, Kale's lifeless form calling her back. She knelt beside him, tears streaking her face, whispering, "No prophecy decides this, not for us." Closing her eyes, she reached deep, pulling the curse from his blood, dragging it into herself. Pain ripped through her, her body convulsing as black veins seared across her skin. Kale gasped suddenly, breath returning to him, the wound knitting slowly closed. But Alara collapsed, trembling, the curse now burning in her veins. "Stay with me," Kale rasped, crawling to her side, clutching her hand. His voice broke. "Don't leave me." Her eyes opened weakly, glowing brighter than ever, both wolf and human entwined. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "I chose this. I chose you." The wolves bowed, one after another, their howls rising in unison. Not for Darius, not for Kale, but for the woman who had defied prophecy, claimed the curse, and stood unbroken. The half-wolf queen. Alara stood, Kale's arm around her, their souls forever bound. The prophecy was fulfilled, not through death, but through sacrifice and love. And for the first time in centuries, the wolves were united under a queen they once rejected, her crown not of gold, but of fire, blood, and destiny.